There comes a moment in every life when silence becomes unbearable. Not the silence of the outer world, but the silence within, where the soul waits to be heard. You may distract yourself with success, with relationships, with endless striving, yet the quiet ache remains, whispering a truth you cannot escape. You have abandoned yourself. Healing does not begin when others finally see you, or when life finally rewards you. Healing begins the moment you decide to see yourself, to choose yourself, to return to the voice that has been waiting all along. The first wound that lives within many of us is not inflicted by the outer world, but by the subtle and repeated act of abandoning ourselves. Long before others may reject us, we begin to reject the inner voice that whispers of our true desires, our real fears, and our quiet truths. The world teaches us early that to be loved, we must bend, that to belong, we must silence something of our nature, and that to be accepted, we must play roles crafted by the expectations of family, culture, or society. In that moment of compromise, a fracture begins to form between the self we are and the self we pretend to be. This fracture is the root of the wound, a place where the authentic voice is muffled beneath layers of obedience, conformity, and the desperate search for approval. The tragedy of this silent wound is that it is often invisible to us. We may move through life accomplishing tasks, building careers, sustaining relationships, and even achieving recognition, while deep within, a sense of hollowness grows. That hollowness is the echo of the inner voice calling out, the reminder that we have betrayed something essential by refusing to listen to our own soul. Many live with this emptiness for years, mistaking it for depression, anxiety, or dissatisfaction, when in truth it is the natural consequence of being cut off from one's deepest essence. At the heart of this wound lies neglect, not the neglect of others, but the neglect of the self. When you consistently silence your own needs in order to meet the expectations of others, you create a life that may appear outwardly acceptable, yet feels inwardly suffocating. You begin to doubt your own instincts, mistrust your intuition, and diminish the importance of your feelings. Over time, this leads to a profound disconnection where you no longer recognize who you are beneath the masks you wear. The abandonment of the inner voice is, in this way, a form of self-betrayal, for it is through that voice that the soul speaks. Healing cannot even begin without recognition of this inner abandonment. To ignore the wound is to continue living under the illusion that life's meaning can be found outside of oneself. We are conditioned to believe that the validation of others, the approval of society, or the affection of those we love will heal the emptiness within. Yet, no amount of external affirmation can repair the damage caused by forsaking the self. This is why so many feel unfulfilled even after attaining what they thought would bring happiness. Success, relationships, possessions, all fall short when they are pursued as substitutes for listening to the voice within. To confront this wound requires courage, for it asks you to pause and reflect upon the many ways you have silenced your truth. It asks you to remember the moments when you felt the inner stirrings of desire, but buried them out of fear of judgment. It asks you to revisit the times when your intuition spoke loudly, but you chose to ignore it because it conflicted with what others expected of you. Each memory becomes a mirror, revealing how often you have chosen the comfort of belonging over the discomfort of authenticity. This recognition is painful, yet it is also the first step toward healing. Pain signals not destruction, but the presence of something real, something that demands attention. When you feel the weight of having silenced your soul, you begin to see clearly that the wound is not permanent. It is a call to return to yourself. The recognition of self-abandonment awakens the longing to reconnect, to honor the voice that has been waiting patiently in the depths. It is in this acknowledgement of the wound that the possibility of healing is born, for only what is seen can be transformed. Choosing yourself is often misunderstood as selfishness, Yet it is perhaps the most selfless act you can perform for your own soul. It is not about rejecting others or closing your heart to the world, but about reclaiming the inner authority that has long been handed over to external forces. For so much of life, people live as though they are guests in their own existence, waiting for permission to act, to speak, to feel, or even to dream. They are told what is appropriate, what is worthy, and what will make them acceptable, and they internalize these voices until they drown out the sound of their own truth. The act of choosing yourself begins the moment you decide to break free from this prison of borrowed identities and turn inward toward the quiet authority that has always lived within you. This turning inward is an awakening. It is the first conscious realization that your life is not meant to be a performance staged for others, but a journey of becoming rooted in your own essence. To choose yourself is to acknowledge that no external validation can ever substitute for the authenticity of living in harmony with your own being. The world may offer applause, but it cannot grant you peace. Others may offer affection, but they cannot replace the love you withhold from yourself. Choosing yourself is, therefore, not an act of rebellion against the world, but an act of loyalty to your soul. It is the declaration that you will no longer betray your deepest truths for temporary comfort. When this choice is made, it marks a threshold of transformation. Life begins to shift in ways that are both subtle and profound. You may notice that the same situations which once kept you bound lose their power over you. The voices that once dictated your worth begin to fade, replaced by the steady rhythm of your own intuition. Decisions become less about pleasing others and more about aligning with what feels true. Even if fear arises, as it often does when we step into authenticity, you learn to see it not as a barrier but as evidence that you are leaving the familiar cages of conformity behind. This fear is the guardian at the threshold, testing your commitment to yourself, but it cannot withstand the force of a soul determined to awaken. Choosing yourself is not a single act, but an ongoing practice. Each day presents countless moments where you either betray yourself or honor yourself. It may be as small as saying no to something that drains you, or as large as walking away from an entire life built on false foundations. In both cases, the underlying principle remains the same: to live in alignment with the voice within, rather than the demands of the outside world. With each act of loyalty to yourself, you reclaim fragments of your power that were scattered through years of self-denial. These fragments begin to weave together into a wholeness that feels both unfamiliar and deeply natural. This awakening often creates discomfort, for the world around you may resist your transformation. Those who have benefited from your compliance may label you selfish, distant, or difficult when you choose to honor yourself. Yet, this resistance is not a sign that you are wrong, but rather a testament to how profoundly you are shifting the dynamics of your existence. Choosing yourself disrupts the illusions that held you captive and forces others to confront their own compromises. This can be isolating at first, but it is through this solitude that you discover the depth of your own strength. Ultimately, the act of choosing yourself opens the doorway to healing because it restores the natural order of your being. You are no longer divided between what you feel inside and what you display outside. You become whole, and in that wholeness, the soul can finally breathe. Healing begins here, not as a grand event, but as a quiet and continuous decision to remain loyal to the truth that resides within you, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is misunderstood, and even when it costs you the comfort of old illusions. The journey of healing is incomplete until one is willing to meet the shadow, the hidden face of the self that is often denied, rejected, or feared. Every human being carries within them aspects they wish to disown, memories they avoid, impulses they suppress, emotions they judge as unworthy. These elements, though pushed into the dark corners of consciousness, do not vanish. They remain alive, shaping choices, relationships, and perceptions from beneath the surface. To choose yourself fully, you must also choose the parts of you that you once considered unacceptable. Healing demands the courage to step into this darkness and discover that what you fear in yourself is not an enemy, but an abandoned fragment of your wholeness. The shadow forms when you are taught that certain qualities are not allowed. As a child, perhaps you were told not to cry, not to express anger, not to be too loud or too quiet, not to dream too wildly, not to challenge authority. These messages slowly convinced you that in order to be loved, you had to present only a fraction of who you truly are. The rest, your anger, your sorrow, your longing, your sensitivity, was buried in the unconscious. But these disowned qualities never stop existing. They wait silently, influencing you in subtle ways, in the relationships you attract, in the patterns you repeat, in the emotions that surface without explanation. You may despise certain behaviors in others, not realizing that what irritates you most deeply reflects what you have not yet accepted in yourself. Facing the shadow is often uncomfortable because it requires you to see that much of what you blame the world for originates from within. The conflicts, the disappointments, the recurring struggles are not merely accidents, they are mirrors revealing the unhealed places inside. Yet, this confrontation is not meant to bring shame, but to awaken responsibility. By acknowledging the shadow, you reclaim the power you once gave away to avoidance and denial. What was once feared begins to transform the moment it is faced with honesty and compassion. Choosing yourself means embracing the whole spectrum of your being, not only the light, but also the darkness. Wholeness cannot exist if you continue to split yourself in two, pretending that only the acceptable parts belong to you. The shadow, when integrated, becomes a source of strength rather than weakness. The anger you once feared may transform into passion and courage. The sensitivity you buried may become empathy and intuition. The grief you denied may deepen into wisdom and compassion. These qualities are not meant to be destroyed. They are waiting to be reclaimed and brought into balance. Healing through shadow work is not about perfection, but integration. The goal is not to erase the darker aspects of yourself, but to recognize them as part of the whole. Just as the night completes the day, the shadow completes the self. Without acknowledging what lies in the dark, you remain fragmented, always chasing after a half-life. To choose yourself is to gather all pieces of your being, the joyous and the painful, the noble and the flawed, and allow them to coexist without judgment. Only then can you move from fragmentation to unity. This act of acceptance is profoundly liberating. When you stop fighting against your own nature, an immense amount of energy is released. The tension of suppressing your truth dissolves, and you begin to live with a new sense of authenticity. Life no longer feels like a constant battle between who you are and who you think you should be. Instead, it becomes an unfolding of your true self, unashamed and whole. Healing becomes possible only when you embrace this truth, that the shadow is not your downfall but the hidden doorway to your transformation. Many remain trapped in cycles of suffering because they cannot let go of the illusions of external validation. From childhood, the mind is conditioned to measure worth through the eyes of others, through praise, approval, recognition, and acceptance. A child learns quickly that love often feels conditional. Behave a certain way, achieve a certain standard, meet the expectations placed upon you, and affection will be given. Fail to do so, and it may be withdrawn. These lessons, absorbed so early, shape the way you move through life as an adult. You begin to believe that your value depends on what you accomplish, how well you perform, and how others respond to you. Slowly, the authentic self is buried beneath layers of performance, while the soul waits unseen behind the mask of acceptance. The pursuit of validation is endless because it is never truly satisfied. No matter how much praise you receive, the hunger remains. Approval feels sweet for a moment, but quickly fades, leaving you restless for more. This cycle keeps you bound to the judgments of others, always striving to be good enough in a world that changes its standards from one day to the next. You may silence your inner truth to keep the peace, reshape your personality to be more likable, or abandon your dreams to fit in with what others expect. Each time you do, the gap between who you are and who you present to the world grows wider, and with that gap comes a deeper sense of emptiness. Healing begins when you dare to see through this illusion. External validation is not wrong in itself. It is natural to enjoy recognition or appreciation. But when it becomes the foundation of your identity, it enslaves you. The truth is that no one outside of you can confirm your worth, because worth is not something that can be given or taken away. It is inherent, woven into your being from the very beginning. The more you chase affirmation from others, the more you affirm to yourself that you are incomplete without it. But when you begin to stand in your own truth, you discover that your sense of value does not depend on the shifting winds of approval. It comes from within, steady and unshaken. This realization often feels like a breaking point. It can be disorienting to recognize how much of your life was lived as a performance, how many of your choices were motivated not by love or authenticity, but by fear of rejection. Yet this moment of clarity is also the threshold of freedom. For once you see that external validation is an illusion, you can no longer be bound by it in the same way. You begin to question why you gave so much power to opinions that are fleeting and often uninformed. You recognize that the approval you sought so desperately was never about love, but about survival, and that survival is no longer necessary. To break free from this illusion requires courage, because it often means disappointing others. When you stop molding yourself to fit expectations, those who depended on your compliance may resist. You may be accused of selfishness, rebellion, or arrogance, but these judgments are only echoes of the system you are leaving behind. The real test is whether you can withstand the discomfort of being misunderstood in order to remain loyal to yourself. Each time you resist the pull of validation, you grow stronger, more grounded, more alive in your own being. As you release the need for constant approval, you discover a new kind of peace. Life no longer feels like a stage where you must perform for applause. Instead, it becomes a path of authenticity, where your worth is no longer negotiable or dependent on the ever-changing opinions of others. You become free to express, to create, to love, and to live without the weight of performance. This is where true healing unfolds, for only when you are no longer bound by external validation can you fully embrace the power of choosing yourself. When you finally choose yourself, a profound shift takes place within the soul. For so long, you may have lived in quiet betrayal of your essence, giving pieces of yourself away in order to be accepted, to be loved, or to be deemed worthy. Each compromise seemed small at the time, but together they created a life where you were present in body, yet absent in spirit. The act of turning back toward yourself, of choosing to no longer abandon your inner truth, is the moment the door to freedom opens. Healing does not mean returning to who you once were, but awakening to who you have always been beneath the noise of expectations. It is not a restoration of an old self, but the birth of a self you had hidden and silenced. This rebirth begins with an honesty that cannot be denied. You begin to recognize where you betrayed your boundaries, where you silenced your desires, where you abandoned your intuition. Instead of judging yourself for those choices, you see them with compassion, understanding that you acted from survival, from fear, from longing for love. That compassion itself is healing, because it softens the sharp edges of shame and allows forgiveness to flow inward. Choosing yourself does not mean condemning who you were. It means embracing every stage of your journey and allowing it to guide you toward wholeness. As you walk this path, love begins to take on a new shape. No longer does it depend on the approval of others or the validation of external forces. Love becomes an inner flame, one that glows quietly but steadily, illuminating your steps. You begin to realize that self-love is not a luxury or an indulgence. It is the foundation upon which all other forms of love rest. Without it, every relationship remains fragile, built on the hope that another person will fill the void you refuse to fill yourself. With it, you move into connections not from need or desperation, but from fullness and authenticity. Healing transforms the way you love others because you are no longer asking them to rescue you from your own abandonment. Creativity, too, is reborn when you choose yourself. The energy that was once spent suppressing your truth is now freed to express, to build, to imagine, to create. What once felt like exhaustion or stagnation reveals itself as the natural consequence of living in disconnection. When you are loyal to yourself, you stop wasting energy on maintaining masks and illusions, and that energy flows instead into the passions and callings of your soul. Healing, therefore, is not only about mending wounds, but also about rediscovering the vitality that was hidden beneath them. Inner freedom becomes the natural outcome of this process. You are no longer bound by the invisible chains of others' expectations, nor held captive by the need to conform. This freedom is not reckless or careless. It is rooted, steady, and aligned with your essence. You find yourself saying yes when you mean yes and no when you mean no, without guilt, without fear. There is clarity in your choices because they arise from within, not from the shifting demands of the outside world. Freedom does not mean escaping responsibility. It means living in responsibility to the truth of your own being. In this place of freedom, healing reveals itself as something greater than recovery. It is not simply about overcoming wounds or escaping pain. It is about remembering the self that has always existed beneath the layers of abandonment, denial, and fear. It is about stepping into a life where your choices honor your soul, where your love flows from authenticity, where your creativity is unrestrained, and where your freedom is inseparable from your truth. Choosing yourself is not the end of healing, but the beginning of a life that is whole, alive, and deeply true. The path of healing is not found in perfection, nor in the endless pursuit of validation from the outside world. It begins in the recognition that you have often silenced your own essence, and that the first wound of the soul is self-abandonment. To heal is to awaken, to reclaim the authority of your inner voice, and to cross the threshold where fear no longer dictates your choices. It is the courage to face the shadow and integrate what you once rejected, transforming pain into wisdom and darkness into strength. It is the breaking of illusions that chained you to the judgments of others, and the discovery of a freedom that arises only when you no longer betray yourself. When you choose yourself, you are not choosing against the world. You are choosing for your soul, and in doing so, you open the doorway to love that is authentic, creativity that is alive, and freedom that cannot be taken from you. Healing is not a return to who you once were. It is the birth of who you were always meant to be. Choosing yourself is not selfishness. It is the deepest act of loyalty to life itself, for only when you honor your own essence can you truly give your love, your gifts, and your presence to the world.